before we started, I really wanted to say I got to read through the majority of your book. I got into a couple of the stories. I really liked all the Keynes, and the pictures that you had were fantastic. So I liked the story specifically about there was one cane that was modeled after an airship that flew over the Arctic.
Norse dirigible, yes.
Yes, that was such an interesting story. I'm looking forward to talking.
It's a very big story. If we ever get to it on the podcast, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, welcome to Hip. Yeah, it's
You never know.
No. She's always gonna check up on her. Well, welcome to Hip and Humble. I'm Aram.
And I'm Mom.
And we talk about all things antique and collectibles. But more than that, we talk about history from a material perspective. We look at history and all the different things that we have made, invented, or used throughout it. And we try to look at it from different generational perspectives and how it relates to culture. And today we are supported by Hip and Humble Antiques, LLC. We've got one location in downtown Fredericksburg, Virginia, at a place called Oldies But Goodies. Please check them out. We have a website, hnhantiques.com. That's hnhantiques.com. And we also have an online store on Etsy. We are also supported by the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network. They are a national online radio network with tons of great creators and sponsors. So go ahead and check them out. And today we have a special guest.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, this gentleman, to introduce him, he's quite the character. At least from what I've read, he has had quite a colorful and interesting life. His collection is that of canes, and it's not one to shake a stick at, shall we say. It is quite an impressive collection.
That was a bad joke.
That was a bad joke. But without further ado, and before I muddy the waters too much more, please welcome Anthony Moss. Anthony, how are you?
I'm fine. It's good to see you both. And thank you for inviting me onto your podcast.
Well, we are delighted to have you, and so excited to talk more about canes. So what got you into canes?
Well, we're big collectors of antiques and other things. I have many collections of books and modern first editions and antique pens and things. And my wife made the mistake of buying me a couple of canes, and it took off from there. And I think she regrets it to this day because I have 2,500 canes and I have to hide them.
Oh, goodness.
So I'm not sure she did the right thing, but I got hooked on it, and collecting is an obsession, really. It's like a hoarding, but with a purpose.
That's true. That's very true.
Yeah.
I'm gonna steal that next time your dad says something.
Your collection, I'll say, I bet you made up with it a little bit. You named your collection after you and your wife, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's at least a small semblance of I don't know, reprieve from having that many canes about the house.
Well, I had. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just saying the point of the collection was to have a representative spread of canes throughout centuries and of different types, rather than collecting, jeweled canes or very expensive canes. I wanted to make sure that we had a broad spread of canes of all different types. Therefore, it was a mixed collection. And also helped me learn about it more.
Absolutely. Well, I guess that kind of leads me into my next question. What is a cane expert? Could you describe that?
Well, you become a cane expert basically because I've been collecting for over 20 years. We always go around antique fairs. I know a lot of dealers. And when I started collecting canes, obviously I talked to both collectors and dealers, and you learn by research and everything else, and by collecting, by holding things.
Right.
You learn the subject. And over time, you become an expert because you can recognize canes of a different era or a different make or a different type. And you understand some of the manufacturers and some of the retailers. So you become, like any subject, it's almost like a PhD, basically. You start living the subject. And that's why I wrote a book, because basically I wanted to put this, my thoughts and my knowledge down for people that are collectors or even students or even people in fashion who wanted to understand where the cane came from.
Well, it's quite extensive, the amount of research that you did. So how did you come about this research? I mean, you mentioned that you live in Keynes, or you speak to different people who are in the and so on and so forth. But how did you come about with this kind of research? Like, what do you dive
see,
into?
what happens is when people know that you're collecting something, especially dealers, they ring you up. They're like runners. They ring you up and say, "I've got something you might interest me. I'm interested in." So you end up by building this collection, and they help you build a collection because they're looking around for you and they're saying, "You need this in your collection."
Right.
And so, or you should have it in your collection. It makes it more complete. And I think, and also I obtained Cane Mania and other seminars. And from that, of course, you meet other collectors and you have lectures. So you also gain from people that have been collecting canes in the past, or from people that sell them, dealers who actually know their subject. And you learn how they're made. You learn how you learn about the handles and the shafts and the collars and the ferrules, which, because it's a interesting subject. And you sort of, as you delve, you find more examples, and you're interested in these gadget canes, multi-purpose canes. So you end up thinking, you discover as you go along, you've got missing areas in the cane wheel. So I started off obviously not knowing much about canes, you could say, but then I realized I have squirter canes, I have gadget canes, I have defense canes, I've got country canes or folk art. You have a morning cane, a day cane, an evening cane, and if you wore canes as part of your dress. Canes were basically masculine. Although women do have canes, often there was a cane, they put material around it, it becomes a parasol or an umbrella.
Right.
But for men, it really is a not say aggressive, but it's men's pursuits. It could be shooting, it could be smoking, drugs, it could be a bordello. There were canes for all sorts of occasions. An evening cane would match your outfit. It would be the Fred Astaire type thing. It could be a dance cane. A morning cane may be very much country cane, or people that walking in the country would have maybe a rather gnarled cane that came from a hedgerow or something, or it was a folk cane was carved with heads on it, or birds or fish or something, and it would show their pursuit. And then you had tradesmen's canes, which would have maybe a rat on it. He would be a rat catcher, or a doctor would have a cane, maybe a skull. And so in some respects, you could recognize what they were.
For sure.
Or it showed wealth. In lots of cases, it was really showing wealth and showing power. And it was very masculine in the sense that women did wear canes, obviously, depending on the era. But men specifically had it there. It took over the idea of a sword. So before, so in other words, men weren't allowed to carry swords unless you were nobility. So a cane took its place in terms of dress, and it was you'd be undressed if you didn't have a cane. You couldn't go out without a cane.
Yeah.
It was something wrong. You might have 300 canes that match different outfits, but basically you would have to have a cane, and it was just normal. It was just part of your dress, part of a hat, part of gloves.
Yeah.
You'd have.
That's what I was thinking.
Yes, you would. So it obviously has changed today. There are still canes made today, and there's still some wonderful canes made today. But by the time you got to the 30s, or so we say the 20s, the fashion was starting to die, and the umbrella took over. If you look at a lot of things with the royal family, etc., you'll find whether it's right or wrong, they're sporting an umbrella and a top hat, but not a cane. It's very strange, really.
It is strange. A lot of the fashion trends, especially in the 20s and 30s, and we've talked about this specifically with buttons too. With the black glass buttons from Queen Victoria being very, extremely popularized. A lot of the fashion trends from that era came from the royal family. So
yes, they gave each other presents, and Victoria and Albert had canes together. It's in the Victoria and Albert Museum. We have canes there, and you can see them online. The Smithsonian had some canes because, but for the Indians, the president gave them a cane. It's part of the, and they passed it on. And so, yes, do you want to know people like that had canes? So it's it was and of course in America, of course you get the canes for the conventions or Keynes, political Keynes showed you who you were supporting. So these things were very much part of every day, and today it's less, but you see it in fashion still, people wearing Keynes. You see dandies, we call them dandies, people that dress well. You could say, oh, he's sporting a cane, very, very flamboyant, but it's part, they're carrying on this tradition.
Well, I would even say in popular, movies, in books and things like that, a lot of times canes are accentuated as a piece or a part of a character, which I think is very interesting. I wanted to switch gears a little bit. You've been called a true collector, and we've talked a lot on our show about collectors, and kind of define that for ourselves in different ways. But what does being a true collector mean to you? Do you subscribe to that? It
becomes obsessive.
Okay.
You're more the fun you have is finding the item rather than buying it, because once you bought it, it's not so important.
It is.
It's the canes you don't buy, or the object, not just canes, could be pens, could be books. It's what you didn't buy that upsets you. And I think, and this is what a collector is. Collector, as I said, it's an illness in a way. It's obsessive, and you become focused. And when you go around an antique fair or whatever, a shop, your eyes immediately fall on that particular type of object. That's what you're looking for.
Yeah, and
it's quite strange, really. But I think yes, it is obsessive. It's almost a daily thought. What can I see? I go onto the not fairs, the auctions. And of course, I know something about the canes, therefore I can see if they're worth good value. And obviously, that's the place to buy canes, because that's trade.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But if you go to a dealer, he's usually got more idea of its authenticity, and he's seen it, and he can vouch for its quality and vouch for its provenance. So but that's what obsession is. You want to collect these things above all other things. You've seen on something else, I better have one of those. And yes, I think it's an illness. Honestly, it is. I can't help it.
Well, I think everybody that is really passionate about something could be described in some way as sick in the head, because you're hyper-focused.
Did you notice how he looked at me?
Well, I was only looking for verification.
Well, I mean, look, you must have in your shop or you online people that collect certain things and have become obsessive about it. It's what I haven't got. It's another thing. I haven't seen this particular model. You must have it.
Oh, that's absolutely true. You talked a little bit about kind of the quality that a dealer might see. How would you judge the quality of a cane?
Well, part of it is, of course, is seeing a lot of canes.
Right.
Most canes, you could say, were a marriage, so that you might buy the handle, and then you would choose a shaft to go with it, depending on what color or what wood you wanted. So in some respects, though you would buy, certainly the cheaper canes were just bent wood, but the more fashionable canes obviously were well carved. They're works of art. And they might have come complete, but obviously a cane is usually sized to the person, so it can vary in length. And really, you get a cane made for you in terms of the length you want it. And one of the things I'd add about canes is walking canes were fashion items. Sticks, you walk with a stick, you wear a cane. So a cane is a piece of apparel.
I see.
That's the difference as well.
Yeah,
when you see quality, what you see is workmanship, and condition, which means it's in very good condition. It's not been knocked about, but it may have a new ferrule because they wear out, like the bottom of your shoes. And lots of the more expensive canes would only be worn maybe for Sunday or for special occasions. So you would invest in quality because it was status. You'd say, I am wealthy, I can afford a jeweled cane. So there's two types. There's really what I call the country cane, or the folk art, or art popular as it's called on the continent, which are really made out of a bent twig or bent branch, but then they're carved to suit. I mean, you still get it today in the UK and in North America. People carve canes. They may have ducks on them or badgers or whatever head, and they're painted.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's still and you still find them at country fairs,
Hmm.
Yeah.
and people collect them.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
as the
we make we make them actually. So I volunteer every week with a group of young boys, and we every year, every time we get a new group in, we'll go out, we pick out walking canes, and we carve them, we'll stain them for them, and
yeah.
do different things, and let them have that as walking canes for hiking as they go through their the program. And you know, it's always such a treasure, really.
Well, this is what they started off as, because if you think of pilgrims and people like that, it was basically for protection, basically to support them, basically to hang a bag on, and you were walking long distances, and you needed to steady yourself. I mean, it goes back further than that, of course, but the earlier canes were very much religious, very much for pilgrims,
Yeah.
but at the same time, they were originally farming implements. I mean, if you go back to the early settlements, they used farming to protect themselves. They settled on the land. They become the early settlers, wherever it was, and people wanted to take it from them. What did they defend themselves with? They didn't have guns. They didn't have swords, but they had their digging sticks or a long stick, and they would either defend them from animals or they defend them from people.
Absolutely.
And yet that's what you use. This is going back in time, of course. Then they became decorative.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions about history, specifically in times whenever swords were most prevalent, and that the idea that everyone had a sword. Swords were very, very expensive. You know, the majority of people did not have swords. Even
they couldn't afford them,
exactly.
and they weren't allowed to have them.
Right.
So if you're in Japan, the samurai could carry a sword, but the peasant could only carry a stick.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they defended themselves.
That's right. How many distinct types of walking canes exist?
Well, in theory, there's sort of three types. I mean, there's the decorative, there's a dual purpose. Fundamentally, it's in the book as well, but it can break down into a hell of a lot of different types, because
subcategories.
I mean, I've got the decorative, the folk art, which I've mentioned, and the system and gadget canes. That's the simplest way of saying it. But each of those breaks down into factions or sections.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think that you look at decorative canes, you've got fashion, you've got something that, that's status, you've got something for the evening, which may be a dark, it would have a black shaft. And right. You go out with your evening wear, and this is even in the 19th century. You still would dress up.
Oh yeah.
And you'd have your gloves, and some of the canes would have a method for holding the glove. It's like it could be an animal's head, and it would just open up, and or it had a ring, and you could put the glove in them, or a scarf. And the fashion was very much that it matched your outfit. So but in terms of folk art, as you already said, you just go into you're in the local village, and somebody wants a cane. He sees is coppiced a piece of wood, or should we say a tree, and it grows straight branches, and he cuts them down and makes canes from them, right. And either uses them for himself or sells them. And but system canes really come about in the sort of mid-19th century. It's more to do with the Industrial Revolution. Before 1830, you don't get many dual-purpose canes. You may get something with certainly you've got sword canes. Don't get me wrong. You might have something with a picnic, knife and fork in them.
Right.
And I've got one which is 1830, but generally speaking, it starts coming in the industrial age. And we'll call it Victorians, because they started a lot of this. It was the Swiss family knife of the period. So if you think of a Swiss family knife,
right, with
all its different blades, the walking cane took on that stance.
That role.
That's a good thing to say. And fundamentally, then you could have a watch. You could have a drinking glass in. You could have, you could have whistles in them. You could have all sorts of things. But most systems canes tended to be, or dual purpose, tended to be for one purpose. But then you got the ones that you presented. So they'd have. I've got one in the book, which is we call it an escritoire. It's like a writing desk. It's got inkwells. It's got pens.
I saw that one. That one was exquisite.
It's and that's really probably the creme de la creme of gadget canes. But you wouldn't necessarily use it. It'd be a presentation piece.
Yeah.
Can you imagine taking all these things apart and trying to use them? But if you had pencils, there were lots of canes, especially towards the end of the 1850, 1860, 1870, 1900, where pencils came popular. And the invention of the pencil really near the turn of the century meant that you could have a pencil in your top of your walking stick or cane or umbrella, and you pull a lever and the pencil comes out. And this meant you could write. So if you went to a club, went to racing, you'd have a pencil with you, and that was an amazing thing. And then you had canes that have not lighters, just lighters, but they also have torches in them. So they were for different purposes. And you've got squirter canes, which are really fun canes for kids because they were cheap. But you press the button, and water comes out. Some of them are very, should we say, risky. But that's another matter. Maybe that's not for a program.
Oh yeah. One of the canes that I really enjoyed in the book, there was an architect cane, and it had tools for architects, like the different
rulers.
The different rulers and things like that. I know there's a more technical term for them, but I'm not an architect, so I'm not.
It is true. And that was a presentation piece again, Swedish, I think. Yes, Swedish.
Yeah, it was Swedish.
It's got a paper knife and it's got proof. But again, I think that was more for a presentation piece.
Something that you wouldn't necessarily.
It's a gift. Will you take it apart? Look. If you had the canes that were useful, was say for the watercolors. So you'd have a cane with watercolors in it. Now that made sense because you had some paper in it, and if you saw something, you had some water, and you had brushes, and you had watercolors, and you could sketch a painting out. So yeah, that was practical. But whether those were really practical, they're just amazing and interesting because of what they put in them, and they're hidden.
Yeah,
I've got some that with razors and soap and stuff. I'm sure they were again good gifts. What could you give your father this year?
Oh yeah. Well, if nothing else, they spark interest and intrigue. But like you say, I mean, as far as utilization, those kind of things are more novelty.
They were really. I don't know how serious, but they were interesting novelties, and they're rather pretty.
Oh yeah.
Or rather attractive or amazing in that respect because of what they put in them. But the trouble with gadget canes is they could be faked quite easily because you can get something. This is the only danger. This is where you've got to be very careful when you buy things. That sometimes these things aren't true. Well, it's part of the trade. People fake things.
Of course.
I think that's whenever being able to touch it and hold it, you can usually get a better sense of.
It's essential.
Whether it is, it really is.
Yeah.
Of whether it's reproduced or not. So, but because after you touch so many of them, you know what it should feel like.
Well, that's how you learn your trade.
Yeah.
Certainly.
You make mistakes. You buy things that you realize are not very good, and you say, "Why did I buy it? I wish I'd seen it beforehand." and you get fooled by it, but you don't get fooled every time.
That's right.
Well, absolutely. And we've talked about this before, but a lot of antiques, especially unique antiques or novelty antiques, are very often faked because because the people who want them are willing to seek them out, and a lot of these antiques are very easy to reproduce or manufacture. And that's not to say that all of those fakes aren't high quality. They're just not the real thing.
Well, they can cast them now with the silver marks on,
right?
And unless you really know what you're doing, there's a lot of fakers about, and you've got to be very careful. And that's why you buy from somebody reputable in those cases. That's what you're spending. Look, I mean, if you can take a punt on something, then it's you take a chance. Sure. If you're buying something that's expensive, it could be Fabergé, for instance, which is made $40,000 or something more. I think there's a lot of fakes, and you'd have to be very careful. But people, again, they take a chance, and it's a lot of money to waste.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times you need that pedigree. You need to know the dealer and where the dealer got it. It has
the provenance of something is the most critical thing.
Just like in paintings.
Absolutely.
Paintings are the same. It's all art.
Yeah.
Beautiful art.
Well, people fake paintings.
Oh yeah, yeah. But that's why it's so important to know where it came from.
There's not much they can't fake if they don't want to.
No, that's very true.
Very true.
Now that there's so much style in canes, and you amassed so much knowledge. during this collection. And to me, you seem more like I don't know, modern adventurer. Would you agree with that description in
Yes,
your
see,
pursuit?
look, life is a voyage.
Sure.
And you make the most of it, because you can. I mean, you don't travel until you fall off the edge of the world. So I think you keep learning. I mean, you leave school or whatever you go to, or university. I did go to university, but you carry on learning, and that's life. Or you stop learning and don't bother. But I have books and I research things, and it's part of the fun, because I love history. I agree with you. History of the last couple of thousand years is fascinating.
Oh, for sure.
Really fascinating.
Oh, for
And
sure.
I mean, especially because I collect writing instruments, antique writing instruments, and the whole start of universal literacy is interesting. But that's going off the subject a bit, because it's another one of my big collections.
I was going to say, if we start talking about that, we can go down a real deep hole. But
I know, we better not. Let's keep to the subject.
Yeah, but something that stuck out to me, in your book, in the preface, actually, you had mentioned kind of the historical context, which falls in line with what we were just talking about. And everything we talk about in this podcast has to do with this concept. Inventions, accessories, and technologies that humans have created through our history, they play a vital role in the description of our culture. So what do you think Keynes have done for culture? What role do you think that they'll play in the future?
Well, obviously for support, you still get Keynes.
For sure.
And, but nevertheless, there's still people collect them today. If you look at some of the fashion shows, a lot of the models are wearing Keynes.
Yes.
And I've got lots of pictures of stars, or should we say personalities, wearing Keynes.
Yeah.
So it's not dead, but really you could say that it sort of met its, and in fact, the most wonderful part, as far as I'm concerned, Art Deco.
Yes.
Then you had this whole. It wasn't called Art Deco in 1925. It was really, that's the 1968. It was Art Modern, and then you got the American Art Modern as well, with the furniture and the liners and all the other things that made it up. But that was the most exciting period because they used amazing materials. Excuse me, coughing slightly.
All right.
They used amazing materials, and I've got one there which is Mayan. I made it wrong in the book in terms of the title, but it's from Mexico, and it has a Mayan head. I mean, the imagination. It was really a time when you had, because Tutankhamun's tomb was found, and Carter found it, and there was this whole business of Egyptology, of pharaohs' heads, and sort of it became a fashion again. This was found. Everybody wanted to have something that looked Egyptian. Right. And we made some wonderful Keynes. There's one in the book which is well, there's a whole range of the book without trying to pick each one out. But you mentioned, of course, something different. 1926, you mentioned the fact of the Norse, and that's really most interesting, because some Keynes were made to commemorate things, or some Keynes were made from say a shipwreck or a railroad track, and they were there to commemorate it, or they sold it off. But that particular one is so interesting because it was the first time that somebody had crossed from the Atlantic to the Pacific across the poles. Mm-hmm. And 3,000 newspapers recorded it. The two were made for the Norwegian government in Italy. Mussolini came to see it. The Crown Prince of Japan came to see it, and it was the person that actually was piloting it was the person who discovered the South Pole, or got to Scott before the South Pole. Yeah. And the first ship went across, and it made history. The reason they used an airship was because if they used a plane and it landed on the ice, they'd all die. This way, you had a steerable balloon. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a Zeppelin, but it was a sort of, it was the drawable is still a rigid.
Yeah, it would be described as like a traditional airship. And just for context, that's
what was interesting was the excitement of that trip.
Oh yeah,
because it made history, and it was amazing. A bit like crossing the Atlantic, or the first barrier crossing the Channel. These were parts of history, and it fired the imagination. Emerson was the pilot, and he was the person that beat Scott to the South Pole. And the second ship that went across crashed, and people died. Yeah. But this was something very special, because nobody had actually gone across from, you could say, Europe into America.
Yeah.
Right.
And
This is the first successful.
and this created enormous excitement. So that's what's wonderful about that cane. Somebody made a handle, French, it's a French manufacturer, French jeweler, in using the shape of the commemorating it and using the shape of the airship. And it says Norse on the side. And I think it's got provenance. Never seen another one. And maybe there's other copies. Maybe it was a commission piece. But it's interesting because the story behind it far bigger than you can show in the book. You go if you go on the internet and Google it, you'll see the whole business. You'll see what it looked like. You'll see the whole story.
Well, you could write a whole nother. You could write a whole nother book on the Norse Deer Goblet.
you can split things. If you're not careful, it can be. I mean, but the problem with the book is I was only limited to about 800 images and about 100 third party. So I had to start. I had them all photographed, and we had to do collages because I couldn't. I was limited the amount of canes I could get in, and I needed more images, but I wasn't able to do it. So I had to be very selective. But
how long was the process in order to?
Well, unfortunately, it was about 4 years because I had a publisher in the UK, CC Art Books, who do a lot of antique books, and we fell out because basically it was taking time, and what I wanted in the book was what we got from Roman and Littlefield. They were really brilliant because when I took COVID sort of stopped killed it for 3 months, and it meant we were really late in publishing. But really, they gave me a lot of support, and the book is 600 pages virtually. It's a hefty book,
quite a large book.
But the point is, it got over the picture I wanted. It got over the story I wanted, and it's very difficult to leave things out. You need examples of most types of canes because each have a story.
Well, and it's a comprehensive history. You're giving a picture of it.
It's a mixture of things. I say it's written for both collectors and for students, people that don't collect cane, who want to or have a cane and don't know where it comes from. And of course, if you're that keen, you join a society, of course, like everything else. But nevertheless, I wanted to try and give a broad picture of what canes were, where they came from, how they were used to some degree. You have a white cane for somebody that's blind. More modern, but anyway, sorry, I hope I'm not digressing too much.
No, not at all. No, I think that's perfectly in line. Also, you mentioned different silversmiths and companies like Heinrich Levenger was one who stuck out to me, and I don't imagine we'll have time.
Tiffany was the other one.
Yeah.
You can't beat Tiffany. I've got some wonderful Tiffany canes.
No, Tiffany canes are pretty impressive. I think he stuck out to me because I hadn't heard of him before. But what really led you to look into the different companies, silversmiths, and legacies? Is there anyone that stuck out to you?
Well, the reason for that is simply, as you start researching silver, there's several sites you can go to, and I wanted to look at the different firms, should we say, the manufacturers and the retailers of these things, because you can see then in their catalogs, if you can find them, what the types of handles. What the types of wood. I mean, Howard K's got. I can't get original one. I've got one on the web, and it shows you the enormous amount of different woods and timbers they use for the shafts, and the different types of canes they produce in the catalogue. Briggs is similar. There was a couple of major manufacturers. Obviously, Fabergé did some wonderful work. Right. And I've got a couple of Fabergé sticks, or at least from their workshop. And then there was also the other one was Verna Workshop, which was in Vienna, was a very interesting. A lot of Jewish people in it as well, but basically they were metal workers, metalsmiths. They did all sorts of things. Right. And you had Franz Bergmann, who made bronzes who made these cold painted bronzes. Now I've got a Bergmann cane, very rare. He did some handles, but mostly it's animals, as you know. If you've seen them in your, I don't know whether you've got them in your stock.
So right now, as far as canes go, we have a couple of different one. There was something I wanted to ask you. So you said if canes are a lot of marker of someone's personality, they show interests, they show that they give a clue as to who the person is. Before I tell you the cane that I have, I wanted to ask you. Judging just based on the short amount of time that you've met the both of us, what kind of canes would you think that we would have?
Sorry, just
What
to
kind
get that last word.
So what kind of canes would you think that we would have?
You personally?
Yeah.
Well, I would think that majority of people have country folk canes, because I think they're still accessible.
Right.
And if you go to any of the state fairs or any of our agricultural fairs, there's a big society of people making canes.
Yeah.
And I think you would have canes that you've inherited, which is very important. Maybe from the Civil War, maybe grandfather would have left you a cane. And it's something. It's a connection with your family, with your forebears, with your parents or grandparents. So I think those are the sort of canes that most people would have. I'm exceptional. I'm silly, really, because I've got this cane. but I do wear a cane. I do wear a cane because I think it's important.
Yeah.
It's nice if you can get the opportunity. It's worth having a cane.
Absolutely.
It's nice to wear, but obviously it's not as popular as it used to be.
Not quite so. So the cane that I wear generally, and at least anytime I have the opportunity to, mostly the last time I got to wear it was a wedding. I have a cane with black wood. It's an evening cane or a dinner cane, and that it has a Freemason symbol and a metal top. And it was engraved by the previous owner. It was something that we had found in a lot that I thought, I don't know, it just called out to me.
An estate.
Yeah.
Well, I am a Freemason.
Oh, okay.
I'm a Grand Officer in Royal Arch, etc. Obviously, it's different constitution than the UK, the USA, or North America. It's under English constitution. But basically, yes, I have Masonic canes and Masonic sword sticks.
Okay.
And they're quite interesting. Basically, a cane like that would say to somebody, "I'm a Mason." It might be a hat, two hands. If you were gay, you might also have a cane that's focused on the fact it was maybe triangular, and it would tell other people that you were gay, even if there was a time, forgetting about the modern era, the 18th century, and that way you could see what, just as you'd have a tradesman cane, you could see a person would say, as you say, it's either status or some other purpose, but it could be just telling people what you do, who you are. So if you're a Mason, you would have a cane because you might wear it to lodges. And also it might tell other people who realize what the symbols are that you're a Mason and you're a brother.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
But you may not be a Mason.
I'm not a Mason, but I enjoy the symbolism. And I think that's why it stuck out to me.
Well, Washington was a Mason.
Yeah, he certainly was. No. Yes. No, we kind of touched on it earlier too, but so you argued that canes were kind of the first fashion accessory, but we had recently done some research on buttons, and buttons similar to canes for a considerable period of human history kind of told the story of the person wearing the buttons.
Let me go run and grab my cane.
Oh yeah. She's gonna grab her cane, but in the meantime,
but see, buttons. If you look at collectibles, then you've got buckles, which are quite interesting. Silver buckles. You've got belts. You've got buttons, obviously, silver buttons or jeweled buttons that you buy sets of.
Right.
I think they're all. I mean, fashion is amazing.
Oh, absolutely.
If you look at the headdress, so you look at the history of fashion. And you look at different women's dresses, and you look at even Chanel and the way she changed women's fashion.
Certainly.
I mean, they're all items. They're all stories, really. Either women had the bustle or whatever they did, whatever they thought they looked beautiful in. It was part of the.
You brought up a great. Absolutely. You brought up a great point too. People subscribe to stories. People and things change based on perceptions of stories. A lot of these huge or large fashion designers and the history behind these fashion designers is because the story, the reason they were so compelling, or they changed so many things, was because of how influential that story became.
Yeah. Well, people followed fashion,
right?
And this is what really, this is going into the from the industrial revolution to the consumer age. That really blew the market. I mean, you had to have something terrible, really. I must have one of those shoes.
Well, yeah, and of course, after the industrial revolution, everything it became. Oh, for sure. But after the industrial revolution, everything became available. prior to that, like you said, a lot of times the canes were a lot
nice
of times
a nice silver top cane. Yes,
yeah.
That's probably 1920s. It looks quite modern.
Yeah. This is one we got in that estate as well.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Obviously, the rubber ferrule is rather a giveaway because it wouldn't. I mean, I use them as well because they're all metal ferrules. But the point is, if you're going to use a cane today, you stick a rubber on the end.
This is actually one that I got at my uncle's.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he just passed this last summer at 90. He was 93. So
it's very much a 20s cane.
Yeah.
The style is it's not nouveau because you get nouveau finishes just before the First World War in theory. Starts of and nouveau was wonderful, but then the Art Deco period took over because everything was too fussy, and people wanted something modern, slim lines, simplistic, Odeon-like.
It was the shortest one he had at the time, and my knee was giving me problems, so that's why he said, "Here, just take this one."
It's a nice cane.
It's
Is it sterling silver or is it hallmarked?
I'm not sure. Let me look.
Not 100% sure either.
Well, usually America it tends to be sterling silver. In Europe, and the UK, we have a silver mark, and it's
well, it should have a mark on it if it is.
Usually do, or maybe a manufacturer.
Yeah, I probably have to get out my.
Don't worry, I don't mean to. You're asking me questions. I don't mean to ask questions.
No, that's all right.
There is a mark, but I'd have to get out my little.
Don't worry. It's just all I'm saying is often you can by hand that you can see the shape. It becomes very new, very Art Deco in terms. It becomes slimmer and it's not as bulky. It's
Yeah, so the handle of the cane it kind of it wraps around into a much more flat.
That's a normal crook. It's crook handle basically.
It's almost like a bone. Like this is a bone or.
Is it a bone? I thought it looked silver. It's not a bone. It's bone. No. It's horn.
Yeah, it's horn.
Oh, sorry, it's very hard to see on the with the camera without seeing it. Then but you're quite right. It's horn, and then there's just a silver collar.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So I couldn't because of the lights hitting it. It's very hard to see.
Yeah. I don't know what kind of wood this is.
Well, it's just a hardwood. It could be
very
rosewood or something. It's very difficult. It could be just mahogany. I mean, they used oak. They used all sorts of things. Beech,
hickory, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the obviously the more expensive the shaft. You had choice.
Sure.
The rare woods were obviously more expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I think I liked it. I enjoyed it.
It's nice. The thing is, it's very wearable, isn't it?
Yes. It's very what?
Wearable. You could,
Oh yes, yes.
Yes. I mean, it's tactile. You would use it. It's not sort of. It's as modern today as it was then.
Oh yeah, and I do use it.
Yeah.
So when I have a bad knee and I'm prone to falling, so a lot of times I use it. It's
good support
for support, and I broke my arm and it in lots of pieces. So
and you can also hit your son with it.
Yeah, she does that.
Yeah, it's very true.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So I know this is probably an unanswerable question. I looked at throughout quite a bit of the book, and one of my favorite heads to one of the canes was the Narwhal Head, and a lot of that was because when I was little, my mother gave me a plush narwhal that I used to have, and sang me a song about a beluga, and for some reason I always associated the two, even though they aren't the same thing.
They're often the most expensive of the canes.
Yeah.
And the French one I got, which is which was Becker, a few others if I remember. I mean, that's very special with the silver top and it's a shaved narwhal tusk.
Yeah, and that's
that makes it incredible. It's quite heavy. It's again more presentation. I mean, quite heavy carrying it. I've got it here if you want to see it. Not complicated about. But I mean, I'm in my den here. I've got a lot of my cane collections in drawers. I collect. I like plant chests, you could say.
That makes sense.
It's So, so at least I can store them without everybody seeing I've got canes, and stop my wife worrying that the canes are taking over the family or the house. They're marching into the living room or the kitchen or whatever.
Well, that leads into my unanswerable question, I guess, would be what is your, do you have a favorite cane?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What is
I mean, one of my favorite canes is the mermaid, the girl on the beach.
Yeah.
It's a what's wonderful about it is it's telling a story. It's a narrative cane, and they're very rare. But you can see that the whole business of the waves and the mermaid and the girl. I mean, obviously it's not an obvious story, but you can see that it's telling something. It's symbolic in some way. It's just nice. I mean, the Art Nouveau period is very, very tactile, very feminine. Men, again, it was nude women and all sorts of things, and but lovely, but canes with not necessarily nudes, but with birds or flowers and things. It was very much that sort of period, and that cane, to my mind, is wonderful. It's probably my very hard to say favorite, because I've got others which are also good, but that to me is my best favorite cane because of it's just so rare, and I love the idea of these two women with a hair, with the mermaid with a hair in the waves, and you see the wave. It's just, the imagination is wonderful.
Oh yeah.
It's just, it's a work of art, and that's why those sort of canes, to my mind, are just amazing, because you realize the miniature art, somebody's actually thought it out. In other words, it's unique because it's carved in ivory, but it's unique that you can see that in other words, it's a piece of art in its own right.
Right.
And it's just wonderful. I mean, the other canes are wonderful as well. I mean, I've got the Moyle cane, which is the one for the circumcision. I mean, that's maybe a strange cane, but it's the ultimate tradesman's cane.
Yeah, that's true.
And then the other one, of course, is the American president, which was not Sherman, I got the name, which was crumbs. Can't think of it for the moment. It's in
not
the book.
Lincoln.
No, it wasn't Lincoln. It's the one that went to France as well. To
Benjamin. No, he wasn't a president.
He was the main father figure of the
George Washington.
It's
Thomas Jefferson.
No, yeah, Jefferson. Yes,
yeah,
yes. And that's again, wonderful cane, very interesting. That's not Narwhal, that's walrus tusk. And then I've got the Indian, the Zulu warrior. I mean, they're all special. It's difficult to say that. I mean, I think I've got 20 or 30, which I think to die for, if that's the right term.
Right.
The rest are interesting.
Yeah,
they all tell a story. But
the Man on the Moon cane was another one.
I love those. Yeah, they're fun.
That was such an incredible series.
I've got a few of those, and again, I love the canes that have come from literature. I've got the one in there which is the Queen of Hearts and the Mad Hatter.
Nice.
And I've got and I think I find them fascinating. I mean, if you went to a show, a Shakespeare show, probably you'd have a cane with you with Shakespeare's head on it to show that you were, that you loved Shakespeare.
Right.
And if you went to Alice in Wonderland, or you went to one of these early pantomimes, again, it's sort of the character from the book and from the show. And I think that makes it quite special.
For sure.
Say with the early ones, of course, are the woman and the man, not a clown, he is a clown, but again, my brain's not working too well. It's at the beginning of the special canes. It's Punch and Judy.
That's right. Yeah.
And they're really again interesting. They were. It's because it goes back to probably the Italian period of comedy, etc.
Right.
So yes, I have favorites, and I have others which I think are just part of history.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's absolutely value to that. Being able to point to that as a piece of history. That's everything that we bring in as far as the antiques and so on. That's kind of what excites me about it excites me about it is that each one of the pieces that we have is a small part of history. It kind of connects us in a tactile way to the people that lived or were back in that time.
It came before us.
Right.
Well, that's why I like children's canes, but I also like children's toys. I mean, again, if you go back in time, I mean, if you want to collect something, there's lots of things to collect.
Oh yeah.
And early toys would be one of my favorites.
That's one of my favorites, and
Yeah.
I do tend to collect the early toys, but specifically any marble toys, marbles and marble toys, because they were the precursor to like pen.
Well, my son collects Star Wars. He's got a big collection and the comics, etc. Yeah.
The oldest toy that we know about. We did an episode on toys a little while back. The oldest toy that we know about is one that was made in ancient Egypt, and it's like a cat that you tap on the back and it's jumping up and down on something, I believe.
I love the tin toys.
Yeah, tin toys are awesome.
Tin toys are.
Well, again, that's part of history again, isn't it? I mean, most of them were destroyed. None of them in the boxes because people played with them and destroyed them.
Sure.
And that's the same for some of the canes. They were, especially the squirter canes, they were for amusing children to some degree. They were made of pot metal. They were cheap.
Right.
And so very few survived. They were pieces you get at a fair.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's true as well for tin toys and also lead toys. The majority of lead toys, especially in the U.S., they were melted down, and so there's not a lot of lead toys left. And that kind of leads us back. So, was there one cane in particular that was specifically difficult to track down, and that led you to kind of learn a piece of history that you weren't expecting to learn?
If you look in the first chapter, I've got a cane which was given to it was actually auctioned at Sotheby's in Paris, and it's Baron de Roux, I think he's called, and fundamentally it was a present from his lover. He come from Austria, banking family, and his lover was American, who was married to his own cousin, obviously for the purposes of being for being normal, you could say. And he gave him a hound. You'll see it's a jeweled hound in the book, and that's got provenance because I've got the pictures in the catalogue where it was auctioned, so I know I've got full provenance of it.
Wow!
It's got the name of his love around the top, around a silver band, but it's an older cane. It's probably about 1890 from Austria, and but what's nice about it, he was a very flamboyant character. Lived in Paris, held big parties. All the fashion people went to him, and he had these dressed up, these balls and things. And he was a real character. And he had this palace which he renovated, and he had some wonderful things in the catalogue of clothes and cigars and things. And he had a number of canes. I was able to buy one of them.
Wow!
But that was. It was secondhand, but the point is that's quite rare. And
absolutely,
what's nice about it is who owned it,
right?
How it was given you the story behind it, but you can see that it's an older cane.
Yeah,
and it's special.
Oh. Well,
I know. For me, I would love to be able to go to one of the auctions with you.
Oh yeah,
I'd love to come over. I'd love to. You're most welcome to come to my house and see my collection.
Absolutely.
Anytime, I'm happy to give you a tour. You can have lunch with us, or tea, or something, or coffee, and come for a tour.
Absolutely, I would love it.
Absolutely. That would be fantastic. Anytime we're over on that side of the pond, we'll definitely have to come over and see that collection.
Well, I was hoping to get a book launch. The problem is that I know I'm jabbed now. COVID virtually finished that in the States, in North America. In New York, I mean, it shut down, as you know, completely.
Right.
That held things up, and really the idea of flying at the moment, or even though I feel reasonably safe, getting on a plane, I don't frankly fancy at the moment.
Well, I've been on a plane a couple of times throughout this mess, and I could say it's more of an annoyance than anything else.
I just got back from Alaska about 2 weeks ago, and
it's just that it's getting it. Look, I normally go to Mauritius and to Dubai because I have businesses there as well, and they're long flights, 15 hours to Mauritius, and it's tiring. But it's open. I can go there. They're welcoming people. I feel I'll leave it till next year when I feel that February I might then start traveling again, because things should have settled down. We need to see what the winter's like here.
True.
Because we have the highest rate of COVID in the UK at the moment. The deaths are still there, but the hospitalization is not so bad. So we'll see.
Right.
Oh, that's good then.
But it does make travel. You get to the point where you don't want to travel anymore.
Yeah.
You get locked at home.
True.
Oh yeah.
It's like going out for a meal. It's a rare thing. You think, well, do I do that?
Yeah. Well, we talked about it before.
That's
you know,
true.
at this point, my position. They're talking about back to the office plans, this and that. I'm like, I just don't see it. I don't want to do it.
No, but I've been back at the office sometime. It's wonderful being in an office. It's stimulating. There's things you can't do on a Zoom meeting. I mean, you can just put your head around the shoulder and say, "What about so and so?" And you get an answer.
Yeah.
Time we do an email or something, or a WhatsApp, and or get the answer. It's another day gone. You're not careful.
I suppose that's true, but well, we're about out of time. So I guess one last question: is there anything that sticks out to you in history that we haven't talked about in the history of Keynes that you would want to?
Well, there is.
Leave.
I think another period of history was really the Huguenots. They were Protestants.
Oh yeah.
Let's say they were founding fathers of America in some case later on, but they came over. They were kicked out of France because they were Protestant, and they came to London. In fact, Fabergé was a Huguenot, and they came into London and they made piquet canes. They made watches and all sorts of things. They brought wonderful craftsmen with them. And the piquet cane is particularly interesting because basically it's generally ivory, turned ivory, and then there's little pieces of silver tube making patterns.
Wow,
It's like a, and that was very much my earliest one is 1650.
Wow.
And the plain ones are very much would be Protestant cane, would be not decorative, but fundamentally all these people really were the founding fathers of America. They came over, they came over from Holland, from Netherlands, into America because Spain was going to take over Holland again, and they wanted to get away from the Catholics. But fundamentally, they came into London and they had these French style canes, which became very popular, and they're quite rare. And there's some wonderful Italian and French piquet. Piquet means it's got silver inlay or silver patterns.
Right.
It's in there are several in the book.
Yeah.
And I find them fascinating because that's what a Georgian in the UK, Georgian gentleman would have, quite tall cane, and very on Malacca shafts. Malacca was the most expensive material, should we say, cane you could get. It was cane, but it came from Malacca Straits.
Wow.
And Malacca was where it got the name cane, because Malacca was the shaft that they used generally on good canes. And I think that's a period in itself which is so interesting because it's got dates on all of them. It's got initials, not everyone, but you can see the ownership. And the dates are interesting because of when they took place.
Right.
1850, 1700, 1720, that's about the end of it almost. And you think, I mean, these are history, 400 years old.
Yeah.
You can still use them.
Oh yeah.
Now I think that's amazing.
It really is.
And they're wonderful to hold. You're holding a piece of history.
Yeah, you're holding something that's over 3 centuries old.
Well, yes. Well, obviously, I've not gone into Tutankhamun's tomb and seen the Egyptian caves, but it's as near as I can get to history.
Oh yeah,
in a way.
Well, it's as near as you can get to not understanding, but feeling a part of that time.
Yes. Because I mean, when you think about it, what can you buy? What can you hold? Unless it's a family heirloom that happens to be that old.
Right. Exactly.
Very
right.
True.
Wow.
That's okay. And I there are in the book, and I'd love to show you some. I've got them in different places, and I think they're just interesting because of the history behind who made them, and the way they escaped from France because they were being persecuted, and the whole thing leads to the Puritan ideal. They didn't have them decorated, and it really then ties in with America and the Pilgrim Fathers.
Yes.
There's a whole, there's a lot behind this, which is so interesting that you can see how it attaches to history.
Yeah.
Oh,
well, I guess I know I said that was the last question, but just a follow up for that. What's the
probably,
oldest?
This was supposed to be half an hour discussion. I probably overdone it a bit.
Oh, that's all right. But what's the oldest cane that you have?
1650, and I've got a pilgrim cane, which is probably older.
Wow.
Wow. But it's hard to find these things. I mean, you just I've seen some wonderful pilgrim canes, but one, they're expensive, and they're usually in Italy or somewhere like that. And I know some collectors have them, but they're not usually on the market.
No. Well, it has been an absolute it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about this, and I think we could go on forever. It's just it's so interesting.
Well, it's nice to meet you both, and thank you for your interest as well.
Oh, of course.
Thank you for inviting me onto your podcast.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And I would love to come see the cane someday.
Oh, absolutely.
Most welcome. I mean, that's part of the pleasure, isn't it, really? But as long as you don't glaze over because there's too many to look at.
Oh, no.
I'll keep it short.
Oh,
show you the highlight.
We're both very easily entertained and very hyper focused.
Yeah. But the thing is, with any antique, I like the story behind it.
Yeah.
That's what's I mean, the object itself is interesting, but knowing where it came from and what style it was.
That's why some of the Japanese canes are wonderful as well.
Oh yeah.
Amazing carvings. Oh,
yeah.
Just amazing.
Oh yeah.
Well, the artistry, the artistry in
it's the imagination. It's not just the carving. I know we should be finishing this, but it's not just the carving. It's the imagination that went into them.
Well, they're artists. They're creative.
Yeah.
Where did it come from? I mean, it's Anyway,
it's beautiful.
But anyways,
I'm still amazed by some of these things, I'm afraid.
Oh, I'm sure.
Well, I think that that's part of being a collector is staying in constant wonder of the things that excite you. But before we dive down deep too much more, stay hip
and humble.
All right, bye. So we'll end it there. But it was really great talking with you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah.
As long as I didn't over talk.
Oh no.
We love you.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to love and leave you and get ready for bed. I think. But thank you again for inviting me, and I hope we keep in touch.
Absolutely.
Be well. Thank you.
Be well. Thanks.